The time is now for the Dr. Bob Sports Show. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics. And for the past 7 years, I've been working alongside Bob, originating our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I'm joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. How we doing?
Doing good, Tan. I see you switched up the intro a little bit. We're not a podcast. Change it to a show now?
I think so. I mean, you see everyone's posting those Spotify raps this week. And I thought to myself, we're not really... we're not on Spotify. We're not a podcast. We're not an audio medium. We're a YouTube show. So I figure let's change the branding a little bit here in week 13.
I like it. Yeah, we are a show. We need to get ourselves a new studio or something here soon.
Exactly.
Well, our first segment is where we will be grading the script writers on how they did for episode 12 of this NFL season. And let's dive right into that dumpster fire in Carolina. We will be getting a casting change for the rest of the NFL season. Frank Reich is out.
Yeah, I mean, the Panthers now drop to 30-63 in the David Tepper era as an owner. And now Chris Tabor will be the sixth different head coach for David Tepper. That's pretty insane. And I don't think firing Frank Reich is going to solve the problems on this offense. But they might rebound this week just due to a favorable matchup, because Carolina wants defenses to increase variance because they don't have skill position talent to beat just basic, quarters and cover three coverage. So when defenses blitz, Carolina is relatively better because it just increases variance. In fact, they're averaging 21% more yards per attempt against the blitz than a standard pass rush this year. And Tampa Bay's defense has the third highest blitz rate in the NFL. So we could see them give up some explosive passes to the Panthers that they would have normally not gotten. So I'm kind of thinking this could be like the Jeff Saturday situation from last year, where he wins his first game and everyone gets excited. Ooh, new coaching changer. Frank Reich was the problem, but really nothing fundamentally changed about the team. And then, the Colts ended up losing the rest of the way with Saturday, and we could see that with the Panthers as well. And this is opposed to the Steelers coaching change that we'll talk about later, that I do think something fundamental has changed.
Yeah, Tepper's had a rough go in the NFL and even the other sports team he owns. I know he's paid a lot of coaches there, but let's shift it over to our next segment where we've got our free bet of the week, and that is a strong opinion on over 46. You can play it up to 47 on the Detroit versus New Orleans game.
Yeah, so we sent this out to clients on Wednesday at 46, and the market bumped up to 47 on our release. And I think the main talking point that we need to get out of the way here in this game right off the bat is the Saints do have a cluster loss at wide receiver. It seems like Chris Olave is unlikely to clear the NFL's concussion protocol. Michael Thomas already on the injured reserve. Rashid Shaheed dealing with a quad strain. So those three guys make up 96% of New Orleans yards from wide receivers this season. So you're thinking, why are you playing over in this situation? But I think in this particular matchup, those cluster loss there won't be felt as much as it would be against other teams. And the market has adjusted down too much for the total based off of the cluster losses.
So do you think the running game is going to make up the difference here?
Well, actually, no. And that, I think, is another reason to like the over. I don't think the Saints are going to milk the clock in this game. Detroit's rush defense ranks 5th according to our metrics. So I think Derek Carr is still going to air it out, possibly from a trailing position. The Lions are favored here in this game. And plenty of pass attempts regardless of the loss at wide receiver, because he'll be able to throw to tight end Juwan Johnson and running back Alvin Kamara, who's second in EPA per target among running backs, because the Lions will likely be without starting linebacker Alex Anzalone. And Anzalone is allowing just 6.1 yards per target this season compared to backup linebacker Jack Campbell, kind of a criticized draft pick last May, who's surrendering 9.7 yards per target. So Johnson and Kamara will have a favorable matchup with Campbell in coverage. And I think Carr will still be successful in the passing game, even without his wide receivers.
Do you think the Saints are going to be able to hold up in pass protection here?
Well, I mean, looking at that, the Lions' best pass rusher, clearly Aiden Hutchinson. He's 4th in pressures this year, but he'll be mostly lined up across from New Orleans' best offensive lineman, Ryan Ramczyk, who ranks 7th in pass blocking efficiency. So I kind of think Ramczyk neutralizes Hutchinson, and Carr should have time in the pocket to throw.
All right. Well, how's it looking for the trenches here with Detroit's offensive line?
Yeah, so on the other side of the ball, Detroit surrendered a 50% pressure rate last Thursday as they really just couldn't solve the left guard spot with Jonah Jackson out. They started rookie Kobe Sorsdahl, and he was benched in the second quarter. Awusika, who replaced him, allowed a 21% pressure rate. So it was just awful from either of those guys. The past couple of weeks with Jackson out, but he'll likely be back on the field this week. And the offense is averaging 0.26 EPA per play in the 26% of snaps with the offensive line combination of Decker, Jackson, Ragnow, Glasgow, and Penei Sewell. So, and to compare that's about 0.25 EPA per play better than just Detroit's offense overall this year. So it makes a huge difference to have, a competent offensive line out there, especially those five guys. And Sewell is obviously the leader of that offensive line. He leads the NFL in pass blocking efficiency. And if Cam Jordan is able to suit up, he might not be able to, but he is the Saints' best pass rusher, and Sewell will completely shut him down. And I also think that the Lions are going to lead the charge on the ground with that offensive line because the Saints surrendered 228 rushing yards to the Falcons last week, and Detroit's offense ranks fourth in EPA per rush.
So is this going to be a pretty good situation for Jared Goff to bounce back after that tough loss on Thanksgiving?
I do think Detroit's passing offense should also be able to move the ball in this game. We talked about how we kind of like the pass protection for them, and they can set up those play action shots with the ground game in a solid matchup. And the other nice thing is that Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously Lions' best receiver, he's third in the NFL in success rate this year, has a good matchup on the inside because Saints nickelback Alontae Taylor ranks 25th out of 29 qualifying nickelbacks in yards per cover snap allowed in the slot. So our model favors the Lions by 6.5. We have a predicted total of 48.8 here, but I think the matchup puts us over the edge here and it gives value on the over. The Saints offense without those four wide receivers will do better against the Lions than most teams because of that loss of Anzalone that leaves a hole right in the middle of the defense for Derek Carr to target his tight ends and running backs. I mean, we've seen Carr have plenty of success without elite wide receivers in the past with his Raiders teams. I mean, he was slinging it out there even when Henry Ruggs went out. What was that 2 years ago in Las Vegas? They were still scoring and made the playoffs that year. So Carr can do it without wide receivers, and his tight end and running backs have a good matchup here. And then on the other side of the ball, I think the Lions, kind of go up and down the field at will here with New Orleans, possibly without its best pass rusher in Cam Jordan, and definitely without its best cover cornerback in Marshawn Lattimore.
All right. Well, I think there's still likely to be 3 more bets this week. They're going to be released on Sunday morning. You can get them at drbobsports.com/NFL. And there's also going to be a play on that massive 49ers and Eagles NFC Championship rematch. So I think that's one to watch out for. But we touched on the Saints wide receiver situation. So let's shift it over to our next segment where we've got the injury watch for the rest of the NFL. And the Steelers are finally getting back Minkah Fitzpatrick. How important is he going to be for this matchup and for the rest of the season?
Well, starting for the rest of the season, I think this Steelers haven't had a full strength defense all year because remember Cam Hayward missed all that time in the early part of the season, and now Minkah has been dealing with some injury issues these past few weeks. But now they're going to have their best secondary player, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and then Cam Hayward alongside T.J. Watt on that defensive line, Alex Highsmith. I mean, you look at this defense top to bottom, it becomes one of the better defenses in the NFL at full strength. And it seems like Minkah is back at full strength with practicing in full this week. So in terms of this matchup, I think Minkah is pretty key in this matchup because we've seen Kyler Murray is averaging a career high 9.4 air yards per attempt. In fact, Murray's never averaged more than 8 air yards per attempt in any season prior to this year. So getting a safety back for this game is going to be huge for the Steelers. And Fitzpatrick is also going to play a role in shutting down Cardinals tight end Trey McBride, who's third in yards per route run. And the Steelers are already fifth in success rate allowed to tight ends. So I think they can shut down McBride in this game, especially with Fitzpatrick on the field. We talked about how Kyler's throwing it deep. Marquise Brown is the main guy he throws deep to, but Joey Porter has really popped for the Steelers. He's been better than I expected coming into this year. He's only a second-round pick, but he's been one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL. And she shadowed Jamar Chase most of last week and only allowed 2 targets when there was an average separation of just 0.9 yards. So Porter looks like another stud cornerback coming into the league after we saw Sauce Gardner have so much success last year. And then Murray could be in trouble because it'll be rookie right tackle Paris Johnson lining up across from TJ Watt. So overall, when all the pieces fall into place for this Steelers defense with Fitzpatrick back, it becomes a very dangerous unit.
All right. Well, we saw the Dolphins had a couple of injuries in last week's game. Is this going to bump the Dolphins defense down for you?
Well, we talked about how much I like this Dolphins defense in a couple of the most recent podcasts, but it is going to be a problem if they're going to be without safety Javon Holland, who injured his knee in the fourth quarter of last game and could be out this week. He's worth about a half point. The other injury that you're referring to is they lost Jalen Phillips to a Achilles injury on that Black Friday game, but I'm not as worried about that one because we've already seen Phillips out this season, and they basically took off-ball linebacker Andrew Van Ginkel and put him as an edge rusher, and Van Ginkel performed well in that role. He had a 16.4% pressure rate this year, and that's compared to Phillips' 12.6% pressure rate. So do I think Van Ginkel is a better pass rusher than Phillips? No, but it's not that big of a gap. So I'm more worried if I was a Dolphins fan about Holland getting back as soon as possible.
All right. Well, CJ Stroud has been incredible this season, but are the injuries in the O-line going to make you worry about him this week?
Yeah, well, I mean, Stroud was pressured on 61% of his dropbacks last week, and that was because 2 starters on the interior are out. We now see left guard Titus Howard is expected to miss the remainder of the season. They were already without center Jared Patterson, who ranks 8th in pass blocking efficiency. So that's 2 guys out on the interior, and you don't really want that against Denver, who's got Zach Allen 4th in pressures among interior defenders. He might be able to collapse pockets this week. Now, we saw Stroud, kind of show some poise when the pocket collapsed last week. I was pretty impressed with his ability to improvise. You usually only see that from kind of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL. So if you're a Texans fan, you have to be excited about what you saw from Stroud behind a shaky offensive line. I mean, he extended plays on 31% of his dropbacks taking over 4 seconds against the Jaguars. And if you watch that game at all, you saw him, face those collapsing pockets all the time, roll out, still try to make plays. So we could see him try to do that again this week because it's not looking like a great matchup for a banged up Texans offensive line.
All right. Jacksonville's left tackle went down last week. Is this going to be a problem on Monday night with Trey Hendrickson lined up on the other side?
Hendrickson, 3rd in pass rushing efficiency this year, so he has been that one bright spot on Cincinnati's defense. And so, initially you look at that and you say, okay, Jags left tackle Cam Robinson's out. That could be a huge mismatch for the Bengals. However, Walker Little ranked 6th in pass blocking efficiency the first month of the season when you remember Robinson was suspended. So it's not as much of a downgrade as it would be for most teams. In fact, Little has already spent plenty of time at left tackle this year, and they'll just bump him out from left guard to left tackle. And you remember at the trade deadline, they already traded for a starting guard to replace Little. So I feel like the Jaguars are the most suited team in the NFL to replace their starting left tackle. Urza Cleveland will step in at left guard for Little, and Cleveland has conceded just a 3.9% pressure rate this season, mostly for the Vikings. So I kind of feel like the Jaguars' offensive line isn't in that much trouble, even though they just lost Trevor Lawrence's blindside protection. The other thing I want to mention before we get out of this injury segment, Grant, is there's a ton of injuries to sort out with the Browns. At the time of this recording, it looks like there'll be 7 Browns starters that will be questionable this week. We might even see Joe Flacco under center. So it's worth monitoring those injuries. I don't know who's in and who's out yet, but I will, by after Friday's practice.
Yeah, I mean, people just go to the website. You can read Tanner's final thoughts on that and kind of get an idea for what's going on with that game. But let's shift over to our next segment. We've got public opinion with me, and we had another great weekend of football. The public firing away with those hot takes. But this week, everyone thinks that Pittsburgh offense is fixed. We've got a stat from the guys over at The Ringer, and the Steelers gained 400 yards of the game right before they hired Matt Canada. Then went 45 straight games without gaining 400 total yards. Fired Canada now, and then gained 421 yards in their first game without him. Was he really that bad?
It is crazy that they did it the game before they hired him, And then the game right after they fired him.
It's insane.
There was a huge, whatever that was, 2.5 year stretch where they didn't gain 400 yards. And that might surprise people that didn't watch the game last week. They see the Steelers only score 16 points, but the offense looked good. And they made some of those changes that we talked about in last week's podcast that were kind of open and available. The most notable being throwing over the middle of the field. Tight end Pat Freiermuth had a 48% target rate on his routes. That's insane for a tight end. And 7 of those targets were versus too high coverage. And he'll be thrown to in the seams again this week, as Arizona's defense has the second highest too high coverage rate in the NFL. The other thing that they did, they increased Kenny Pickett's play action rate from 15.3% in the first 11 weeks to 21.6% last week. And the next thing I'd like to see play caller Mike Sullivan do is increase the workload for Jaylen Warren. I mean, I know Najee Harris had a decent game last week, but we know from the sample size of this whole season, and frankly, seasons past, that Warren is better than Najee Harris. And Warren is 5th in yards per route run among running backs, and the Cardinals are surrendering a 50% pass success rate to running backs. That's 30th in the NFL, and Arizona is no better at rush defense. They're 30th in EPA per rush allowed. So I think there's one more step for Mike Sullivan to do, and if he does that, the Steelers, they could be in that league average offense range, especially this year with so many backup quarterbacks playing. If you had a league average offense with that defense we talked about earlier, this team could finally be dangerous, even though they seem to be doing it with what everyone's calling voodoo magic for the first half of the year.
Yeah, we talked about how tough this division was going to be for them because they're not going to win that many games because the division is so good. But looking at the injuries that have happened there, they can make a good run at this.
Yeah. I mean, Browns starting quarterback out, Bengals starting quarterback out. I think the Steelers are a favorite to make the playoffs now, and I kind of like them if the market continues to value them as a below league average team.
All right. Well, let's shift over to our next segment. We've got stock up, stock down. Whose stock are you going to buy this week?
So this week we're buying Titans offense stock. I feel like we're at a low point this week. They haven't put up a ton of points in the past few games, but they did average 6 yards per play versus Indianapolis in week 5 due to what I believe to be a favorable matchup, specifically against that Gus Bradley, cover 3 defense. The Colts have a low pressure rate, the 30th in the NFL in pressure rate, and they won't be able to take advantage of the Titans' shaky offensive line. We know that's what holds Tennessee back, but the Colts are not a team that's going to be able to take advantage of that. And the Titans averaged 27% more yards per attempt against zone than man this year. The Colts, league high, 91% zone rate, and it doesn't look like the Colts will have Juju Brents back this week, so that means we could see DeAndre Hopkins lined up from a backup cornerback, Darrell Baker, who we've been kind of railing on this podcast all year. And the Colts are not particularly a good run defense either. They're 30th in rush success rate allowed. So, if you kind of let the Titans pound the rock with Derrick Henry, and then DeAndre Hopkins is lined up against a backup cornerback, and they can't, take advantage of your bad offensive line, this is, if the Titans are only going to score, in that, above 20 points, 5-6 games this year, this certainly seems like one of those games at home to the Colts.
All right, I like it, but whose stock are you going to be selling this week?
This week I'm selling the Bengals season. It's over. I mean, there was a chance that Browning would be confident and they could have kept themselves in the hunt, but he did not impress at all in his first start. The Bengals' only touchdown drive last week was just a result of that fluke tip pass for a 31-yard gain by Jamar Chase. And it looks like that the Jaguars are going to possibly have Tyson Campbell, starting cornerback, back on the field Monday night to contain Chase. Cincinnati left tackle Orlando Brown, the big free agent signing they brought over from Kansas City, has been awful. He ranks 6th worst in pass blocking efficiency, and he's going to struggle versus edge rusher Josh Allen, who had a career-high 12 pressures last week, and Allen is now up to 3rd in pass rushing efficiency in the NFL. So at this point, the Bengals might as well tank for a draft pick and just try to address that safety situation because the defense has completely fallen off a cliff. And I think the Jaguars are a good teaser leg on Monday night.
All right, I like it. Well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got our DraftKings player of the slate. Who do you got lined up for us?
This week, I've got Tyreek Hill at 9,600. And as you know, it's been pretty rare for me this season to put such a high-priced guy in this spot, but I think Tyreek just has to be in your lineups on Sunday. This is a great game for him to rack up some yards to hit that 2,000 mark that he's been talking about since training camp. So I kind of want to dive into why I think this particular game is well suited for Tyreek. We've seen Tua, particularly last week against the Jets. He had an average time to throw of 2.17 seconds. So that was the second quickest time to throw for any quarterback in any game this season. And that's because the Jets rank fourth with a 41% pressure rate. So Mike McDaniel was like, let's get the ball out quickly and not deal with this pass rush. Now, this week, complete opposite. I mean, we're seeing the Commanders, their pass rush is depleted with, they already traded Chase Young and Montez Sweat, and then their next two guys, Adaba and Smith-Williams, are also likely out. So they're going to be down to their fifth and sixth options at edge rusher. And we saw the Commanders surrender 15.8 yards per play on vertical routes on Thanksgiving. So I think Tua can do something similar that we saw from Dak. Now, Kendall Fuller is the only really good player in the Washington secondary. He's 11th in yards allowed per cover snap, but I think Fuller will mostly be on Jaylen Waddle just because he doesn't have the speed to nearly match up with Tyreek. So they might try and bracket Tyreek or something, but I think Fuller kind of takes away Waddle and McDaniel's schemes get Tyreek open, and he gets in behind this defense on some deep shots. Tyreek, third in EPA per target this year. Everyone wants him to get to 2,000 yards, and this could be a game that we could see him get up over 200 yards and a touchdown or two. And so that's why I think the $9,600 price here on DraftKings is justified and maybe a little bit short.
Yeah, he has been insane this year. I'm pretty sure he's only had like 3 games under 25 fantasy points, so it's hard to miss on that guy. But let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got the weather of the week. What are you seeing out there?
Well, it's going to be a humid weekend across the East Coast, and there's looking like the possibility of showers affecting games all the way from New England to Pittsburgh. So that's going to be something to monitor. We're taking a look at the weather for each stadium on Sunday morning before putting together a DFS lineup or making those final start-sit decisions in the fantasy playoffs race. So right now, I don't know if it's going to be constant rain on Sunday. Is there not going to be any rain at all? Definitely going to be humid, but I would say double check that on Sunday morning because this could be a weather week.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got the Sunday night primetime preview. You've got the Chiefs at the Packers. And last week, Kansas City came back from 14-0 to win comfortably in Las Vegas. Green Bay came out of Detroit with a win on Thanksgiving despite missing their starting cornerback Jair Alexander, starting linebacker Devondre Campbell, and starting running back Aaron Jones.
Yeah, that was a big surprise. And it wasn't a fluky win by the Packers. They outgained the Lions by 1.1 yards per play with all 3 of those guys missing. Pretty big surprise. Who stepped up? Christian Watson stepped up, 94 yards. It's a season high for Watson, but I kind of think he's going to be completely shut down by L'Jarius Sneed this Sunday night.
Yeah, what'd you think of Jordan Love's game last week?
Well, so Love has already been minimizing mistakes. He's got the third fewest turnover-worthy play rate in the league. But last week, he showed something that he hasn't done all year, which was threading in passes into tight spaces. He had a career-high 36% of his throws charted as perfect ball location, according to PFF last week. So I don't know if that's going to hold. And I kind of feel like Steve Spagnuolo also thinks that's not going to hold. He's going to try and force Love into being perfect again this week with an aggressive scheme. Kansas City's defense is the 9th highest man coverage rate in the NFL. And Love throughout the season has struggled against man. His yards per attempt is only 65% of his yards per attempt against zone coverage. So I kind of think that Spagnuolo is going to say, I saw you do it last week against the Lions, but try do it again. Try be the most accurate quarterback in the NFL again on this Sunday night.
Do you think the Packers have any hope of beating this aggressive Chiefs coverage?
Well, what Love is going to have to do is get the ball to Jayden Reed, who's going to have to win quickly on the inside. So Reed is 8th in yards per route run in the slot, and he's going to line up across from Chiefs nickelback Trent McDuffie, who's being targeted every 5.9 slot cover snaps. That's the 8th most frequent of any qualifying nickelback. So the Chiefs kind of want you to funnel those targets to the inside. They certainly don't like to give up the long bombs on the outside. So I think the Chiefs will be funneling that, and that's where Jordan Love's going to have to look against this man defense.
How do you think Green Bay's offensive line is going to be able to hold up here?
Well, I like the matchup for the Packers offensive line, mainly because their two best linemen, right guard John Runyon and right tackle Zach Tom, are going to be the two that line up against the Chiefs' two best defensive linemen, George Karlaftis and Chris Jones, who've combined for 84 pressures this season. So I kind of like the Packers to neutralize what's been a pretty dominant Chiefs pass rush thus far.
Yeah, as a Chiefs fan, it feels like our run defense can be a little shaky sometimes.
Yeah, the Chiefs, I mean, if Aaron Jones was in this game, you would be worried about that. The Chiefs rank 31st in EPA per rush allowed, but A.J. Dillon, he's averaging career lows with a 10% missed tackle forced rate and just 3.5 yards per carry. I mean, Dillon is not scaring me at all. He's not a guy that's going to hit an explosive, and he sometimes doesn't even get what's blocked for him. So I don't think that Dillon is going to run the Chiefs out of the light boxes that they like to play this week.
All right, looking at the Chiefs, does last week's breakout game for Rashee Rice solve any of the problems for our offense or no?
Well, I mean, Rice set career highs with 107 yards, 10 targets last game. But the problem is for the Chiefs offense is the lack of a downfield passing game. And Rice doesn't solve that. His 5.5 yard average depth of target ranks 99 out of 102 qualifying wide receivers. So Rice is really just doing what Juju Smith-Schuster did last season, which is good. I mean, that helps the Chiefs, but it doesn't necessarily make them more dangerous. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is averaging a career low 7.2 air yards per attempt, and Kansas City's wide receivers have the third most drops in the league. So I'm not necessarily thinking that the Chiefs offense is all of a sudden fixed after, Rashee Rice breaks out here. Now, that said, might not be a problem this week because the Packers are 28th in success rate allowed to tight ends, and that's just going to open up a huge hole for Travis Kelce. So maybe Kelce just blows up. The passing offense looks good, in the short term this Sunday night, but maybe not long term. I'm not as bullish on Kansas City's offense.
All right, well, it looks like the model favors the Chiefs by 6 points with a predicted total of 41.7. So not much value there, but what prop do you have your eye on for the people?
So the primetime prop this week is going to be Jayden Reed over 3.5 receptions. We talked about it a little bit earlier in this segment, and he only went over that number once in his first 6 games, but the rookie has been establishing himself in this offense, and he's had at least 4 catches in 4 of the last 5 games. And now he's going to get even more targets with tight end Luke Musgrave out. And the Chiefs are going to challenge Jordan Love all game with man coverage like we talked about. And Jayden Reed leads the Packers in yards per route run against man coverage. So I think Matt LaFleur is going to want to get him the ball. And I think Jayden Reed over 3.5 receptions is providing some good value this Sunday night.
I like it. Well, I think that will do it for the podcast this week. If you're looking for more content, head over to drbobsports.com where you will find all of Bob's college football write-ups for the conference championships. And please go ahead, leave us a thumbs up if you're enjoying the content, and we will be back next Friday to talk week 14 of the NFL.